Here is an invention that few know the origin of: the toilet. A very important invention in human history, and the most crucial for someone in trouble on the street, right? In addition to having an operation that involves quite interesting physics concepts. For a long time in human history, people relieved themselves wherever they were. Well, some still do that today, but with the concentration of people in cities, it soon ended up generating numerous health problems, in addition to the bad smell, of course. Something that the inhabitants of the Indus Valley soon noticed and took steps to solve around the year 2500 BCE, developing one of the world's first sewage and drainage systems with primitive flush toilets using running water. Another civilization that dealt very well with this problem was the Romans, with their collective toilets. That's right, people gathered for a happy hour in the city's bathroom. The operation of these toilets was similar to those in the Indus Valley, with running water under the seats, leading sanitary waste through aqueducts directly to the Tiber River. But with the fall of the Roman Empire, these good inventions also disappeared, and many Europeans in the Middle Ages simply went back to throwing their sanitary waste out of the window and pissing in the streets. That's right, except for some houses with external toilets with a cesspool, many people dispose of their waste in the street, letting the rain do the rest. The castles even had a little more comfort in this regard. They had bathrooms with a wooden seat, with a hole in the middle which basically allowed waste to fall freely. And from time to time, the person responsible for cleaning would take care of collecting things downstairs. In some castles, this wasn't necessary, as the waste fell directly into the water of the defensive moat around it, keeping enemies further away every day. And so people would remain for more than 1,000 years, in almost direct contact with the dirt they generated. That was until the invention of the first flush toilet in 1596, the year in which the English inventor Sir John Harington, a godson of Queen Elizabeth I, decided to improve the Queen's sanitary throne. At the bottom of John's toilet, which he called Ajax, there was a metal bowl with a hole in the center, sealed by a leather valve. And at the top, there was a water reservoir used for flushing. After using the toilet, he would activate a lever that released the water from the reservoir, and at the same time, opened the leather valve at the bottom, carrying everything to the lower reservoir. The main objective of John's invention was to isolate the environment from the smell of sanitary waste and prevent diseases that they believed were transmitted by the foul odor. But as the reservoir needed to be emptied and cleaned every day, the idea only pleased the Queen, who obviously had someone to clean it for her. So people in European cities continued the unpleasant habit of disposing of everything in rivers, fields, improvised holes, and even in the streets. But it was evident that this would have to change eventually. With the increase in urban population, this quickly became a significant problem, forcing cities like London to create large holes to store all this waste. Holes that filled up and needed to be emptied frequently. Imagine a lousy job. Basically, a man entered the cesspool with a ladder, filled a bucket attached to a rope, and another person outside pulled it up and emptied it into a cart. They were called night soil collectors. As you can imagine, the lack of a proper sewage system led to numerous diseases during this period, and not only for those poor souls who worked cleaning the cesspools, the population, especially in cities, suffered from frequent outbreaks of cholera, typhoid fever, hepatitis, well, the list was long. The situation only began to change in 1775, when the first patent for a modern toilet was granted to the Scottish Alexander Cummings. His toilet design had John's flush, but it also had an innovative S-trap that isolated people from waste and sewage gases, making the home more pleasant and preventing numerous diseases. System that uses the principle of the siphon effect, the secret to the operation of the modern toilet. When at rest, the water on both sides is at the same level due to the theory of communicating vessels. So, if a small amount of liquid enters the bowl, the level will rise, and the same amount will drain on the other side. Things change when a large amount of water enters the bowl. At this moment, the incoming water pushes the water on the other side and fills the siphon, initiating the siphon effect, which occurs due to the cohesive forces of the liquid and the force of gravity. The cohesive forces of the liquid keep the water molecules together, pulling the neighboring molecules while falling on the right side due to the force of gravity. At this moment, a water flow is created that causes the flush, and only stops when air enters the siphon again. Effect that was already studied by Pythagoras around the year 500 BCE in Greece. He invented a cup that used this siphon effect to magically empty itself, and which is now known as the Pythagorean cup. But going back to the history of the toilet, from 1775 onwards, its use by the population of large cities began to gain popularity, and a public sewage system needed to be built. Well, initially they simply connected it to one of the 200,000 existing cesspools in London, which were cleaned from time to time by the night soil collectors. But with the continuous adoption of the new invention by the population, these cesspools soon couldn't handle it anymore, and a part of the sewage started flowing into the streams. These streams carried everything to a big river that cuts through the city, the River Thames, so you can imagine that this would eventually become a problem. This brings us to a historical event in London in 1858 called the Great Stink. Well, you can probably guess what happened. In this year, the river, which was already practically an open sewer, suffered from a severe drought, causing a terrible sewage odor that engulfed the city, even leading to the suspension of Parliament. Another problem was that people started getting very sick, with outbreaks of cholera and other diseases spreading throughout the city, in part due to the unhealthy environment, but mainly because the water they drank also became highly contaminated. The immediate solution to alleviate the bad smell was to dump tons of lime chloride into the river, which is used in water treatment, and in Parliament, curtains soaked in lime chloride were hung on the windows to try to filter the air there. We can say that the situation had become quite unpleasant for them, but the definitive solution that really solved the problem was to build a large and complex sewage system with pumping stations that carried everything away from the city, dumping the sewage near the river's mouth. They also hired people who were responsible for unclogging this sewage network. Imagine a bad job and multiply. Over time, sewage treatment stations were built in large cities, reducing the impact of this sanitary waste on the environment. Well, that's what should be done, but we know that in most cities around the world, unfortunately, this is still not the case. Now, if you think that the toilet is an invention that is out of researchers' focus nowadays, you are mistaken. Billionaire Bill Gates, for example, is funding a toilet to be used in extremely impoverished areas like some regions in Africa. His thesis, which is nothing new, is that with the implementation of a proper sanitation system, many diseases in these areas will be controlled and even eliminated. The difference is that he wants to implement this in places with limited access to clean water, which is the main component of our current sewage system. There are several projects funded by him. For example, this one works with solar energy, which is used to filter the water from waste and compact the solid part. Some of the water is reused for flushing, and the remaining, along with fertilizer, can be discharged into the environment. This one looks like a typical toilet. The difference is that it uses a barrier to isolate the odor and a screw auger to compact the waste and separate the liquid. All of this without needing water for flushing. The extracted water is filtered, and the solids are incinerated, with some of the heat being used to dry the next batch of solids. These are just two of several projects from universities funded by him. Very interesting, isn't it? Who would have imagined that such a simple invention would have such an interesting history? Well, if you liked the video, don't forget to like and share. Oh, and don't forget to watch these other videos that I'm showing here. They're very good, I recommend.